So everything that had defined me for years, being a leader of Marines, being a Marine, being, married, being a father, like suddenly in very short order, probably within 6 months, I'm retiring, we're going through divorce, my son's going to Florida, all these things that define me are now kind of washed away, and I'm like, well, screw it, I might as well start a completely new leaf. I'll never forget, it was the 38th page of my job hunt. I see this tagline that says, do you find yourself watching shows on the History Channel and correcting the narrator because they're wrong? And I'm like, abso-freaking-lutely, that is me. So there was a video game studio up here. The town that I work in, Redmond, is kind of a hub for video game developers, and they wanted a military research analyst. So from my office at Camp Pendleton, I had a phone interview and nailed it, and then they asked for a follow-on. I came up here, did the in-person. On the spot, they said, we got 5 other guys lined up, we're not even going to talk to them, you're the guy.
Love it.
So nailed it.
Now that is atypical.
Very atypical.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
So I mean, so people aren't going to be as lucky as you in that regard. I mean, especially you said page 30.
Yeah.
All right. So what would you say when you're looking? So what if that hadn't happened? I mean, what do you think it would have been like had you not stumbled upon that?
So, and I wasn't prone to failure. Like I said, I nailed everything I ever attempted. So I think there's a zero defect mentality, especially in the service, because, we don't accept subpar performance. Minimum standards are a starting point, not a goal.
Yeah.
I think a lot of fallacies that some separating military members have is that I need to find my next career now. Well, no, you don't. You need to find a bridge to get you to what you love and what you want to do.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that you make. It is a starting point. And I mean, I don't have the statistics to back it up, and it's fine, but I think a lot of people, whatever they do when they first come out, that's not what they do. That's not what they're doing a year later.
Oh, yeah.
And that's okay. Like, if you need to find something and it pays as much as possible and it's 9 to 5 and it's not necessarily in the realm of what you want, then you could work on what you want to do in the evening or go to school or do whatever it is and kind of work towards that path. So I wouldn't want that to be deflating to anyone. It is part of the process, and I think it's really, really going to be difficult to find exactly what you want right when you get out, because it is a complete cluster.
Yeah.
I mean, it is culture shock, for lack of a better term. So definitely. Okay, so let's talk about your job now. So how happy are you?
Oh, man.
And I mean, let's talk about the escalation.
So I'm working on an unnamed game right now. Very well-known, world-renowned studio, and it's very military-centric, very military-based, military vehicles. And so they have all these whip-smart people. I mean, we're talking PhDs, degrees, smartest people in the world. But if you start talking to them about things like, I've had people walk into me and say, what's the diameter of a 2.75-inch rocket? And I'm like, do you hear yourself talk? So I had to educate a lot of these computer programmers and video game programmers and level designers and everything else about the intricacies and the nuances of military hardware. So it's very much akin to what I was doing at some points in my career, to where I'm talking all things arms, ammunition, and explosives for both ground side and aviation-based vehicles, talking about armor thicknesses, like all these really cool things. And so I started alone and unafraid, 3.5 years ago, and I was one of very few veterans in about a 60-person studio. Wow. We've since grown to about 140 people, and we've hired on a bunch more vets, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, you kind of talked about who's your Mount Rushmore, and I'm walking around, and we're used to accountability and, clear, firm, directed leadership, and, this is what I expect, inspect what you expect and all that stuff. And I'm going to people in leadership positions, and this isn't a slight against them, but I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing? What are my metrics? What do you want from me? And they weren't as clear and concise as I had hoped.
Yeah.
So I had a bit of an identity crisis when I came out, because I thought I had to deprogram the military side to try to blend in, urban camouflage to the civilian side. And within several months, I realized, they hired me because of my leadership, because of my experience. Why am I turning my back on 22 years of hard-won experience? I am that guy. Yeah. So, don't turn your back. Don't deny who you are. Don't turn your back on your military experience. That's what people are looking for,
Yeah.
Someone
told me when I was starting out in a job post-military career. They're like, veterans feel like the insurgents here.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was amazingly put. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, I guess I got to turn it down a notch.
Yeah.
And then I started making little sacrifices that I very much regretted and should have
Yeah.
just completely stayed the course. So, what else can you tell us about what's going on now? I mean, what's the future look like? And
in short order, in the course of a couple of years, I went from military research analyst to lead military research analyst. I've just been promoted to director of military research.
Awesome.
So I found my niche, I found my strength, and I embedded myself like a tick and showed my company how valuable that job was to the point where now we've expanded our scope threefold.
Yep.
And we're looking at maybe hiring a fourth. Awesome. So, I mean, you have to kind of find your strengths. Even if your strengths are embedded in what you learned in the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, whatever, and let people know, like, hey, what I'm doing is valid, mm-hmm. it's valuable, mm-hmm. and this is why you need me on board. Not overselling yourself, but, just, be that humble, quiet professional that still kind of advertises, what you're doing.
One thing we talked about yesterday, really briefly on the phone, and I didn't hit on it yet, but you talked about your interview and the feelings that kind of came up when you were interviewing.
Yeah.
And I mean, and that's when I was like, what haven't you done in the Marine Corps? Like, come on now, like, who cares? Like, you got it, or whatever the case, you should have went in confident. Tell me about how that was and how you felt, and just so I want people to understand what it might be like for you when you go out there and do it.
Yeah, it was very disarming, and I was really taken aback. I was surprised. I mean, here I'm a former drill instructor, right? Spent 3 years on the drill field. I'm a combat veteran, been shot at, shot back, flew in Afghanistan. I mean, I did a lot.
Yep.
And then here I am, in this panel of civilians, and I have butterflies. I'm nervous. My palms are sweating, and I'm like, what am I worried about? What, that people are judging me? Like I've done everything I ever wanted to do in the Marine Corps. This isn't shit. But it's still very disarming, and I think the reason why, at least for me, how I later interpreted it was, when I went to combat for the first time, I was trained for it. I had trained my whole career for it, mm-hmm. And everything that we do in the Marine Corps or in the services period, it's as a team. There is no individual task, right? I mean, your smallest component in the infantry is a fire team, right? 4 guys. So, and you're heavily reliant upon the other guys to do their job so you could do your job. Yep. Now you're thrust into something that you're very ill prepared for. The services are doing better with your separation classes that you take and all that, but I mean, come on, that's a week. Mm-hmm. You train for months or even years before you deploy. Yep. So now here you are thrust into the breach alone. And one of my failing points, and I'm sure a lot of veterans are the same way, is I didn't reach out to a team. Yep. I got this. I can totally do this.
I mean, like, so what stopped you?
Pride. You're very ill at ease when you ask for help, I think, because you have trained metrics and trained tasks that you apply every time you go to combat or every time you're in training or, a pre-deployment training or inspection or whatever. And so when I exited the Marine Corps, there was a little bit of feeling of guilt that I was abandoning my mates. And then, here I am trying to do good, the kid from California that's making good for himself. But I didn't swallow my pride and call somebody who had been there, done that. I had plenty of Marines I had known, either peers or seniors, who had already made the transition. They had retired. They had gotten out. They were successful on the outside, but I didn't want to seem weak and ask for help. Yeah. I'm like, hey, they did it. Why can't I do it? I haven't failed at anything in my life.
But you don't even know if they did it. I mean? And I'm with you. And unlike you, like, I did everything. I tried everything. I went to... outside of Pendleton, I did a transition course in Oceanside, which was phenomenal. That actually led me, that was when I was just thinking about when I was going to get out. That led me to decide I'm getting out now.
Yeah.
I did the required at Pendleton. I did tons of networking. I did all kinds of events on Meetup or whatever it was. Yeah. And I still felt the same way. I mean, it was terrible, and it was definitely a wake-up call. It leads me to the entitlement thing. So we got it. All right, it's going to be difficult, and I hope you understand, and that is the exact purpose of Flyby's media, so you could kind of understand. Here we are in t-shirts hanging out. It's not formal. It's not, you're in a suit at a transition program. It's not all like that. You could go about it however you want. But this is something I think we don't hit on enough, is the entitlement factor.
Yeah.
So I came from, I mean, especially if you're a Marine. So, I mean, you come out of the Marine Corps and you're like, there's group is like, I'm scared, and then there's a group like, who wouldn't want me? What are your thoughts on that? And I mean, what do you think, how do you think they need to check that and kind of put it aside?
I think it's part and parcel to the whole thing, actually, because maybe you come out of the service feeling like, I'm a Iraq veteran, I'm an Afghanistan veteran, or I stood on the wall at the DMZ in South Korea, or whatever, and you start looking at some of these kids and you're like, what were you doing in college when I was fighting? Shit can that idea, because it's not for everybody. Going through recruit training, going through boot camp, that they weed out people. If there was a saying in the 70s, if everybody could be a Marine, it wouldn't be the Marines, right? The path that certain people took, totally up to them. The path that we took was our calling. Don't downplay, don't look down on people who happen to go to college or whatever. That was their calling in life. I think that maybe some people who maybe don't come out of the chute disgruntled, they start to get disgruntled because maybe they do have a couple failed interviews, or they're, hey, you're not the candidate we're looking for. And then you start to play into the whole, well, I'm going to grow a beard and get tattoos. I mean, look at me, right? And that doesn't help our cause at all, because it kind of stigmatizes the whole, every veteran's disgruntled, everyone's got PTS, everyone's messed up, I like being the anomaly. I like being the guy that people come in and they look at I've got a lot of swag in here, but I've got an I love me wall in my office, and people look at this picture and they're like, you were a drill instructor? I go, yeah. They're like, you're the nicest guy in the world. And I go, yeah, you don't wake up being a dick every day, So the whole disgruntled veteran, entitled veteran thing, it doesn't do anything for us. It doesn't help the cause. Yeah. And frankly, when you go to college, when you go to your first employer, second employer, third employer, wherever you end up, you're probably going to run into other veterans.
Yeah.
And they will understand you more than any civilian ever would. And just swallow your pride and deal with that. You're never going to convey to a civilian who never deployed or never wore the uniform what it's like to be that guy. They would get a lot of thank you for your service, and then there's a canned response, it was my privilege, and then that's it. You leave it at that. Once again, if I was mentoring, young Sergeant Ski or whatever, I would kick my own ass for not taking advantage of things like tuition assistance on active duty and all that. And recently, I contacted my counselor at the school that I did go to, and I'm going to start pursuing, getting my bachelor's again.
Awesome.
But again, I'm the anomaly. I mean, if you're 21, 22 years old at the end of 4 years and getting out, good Lord, get the education now while you can, and you got the tuition assistance, and you've got the book stipends in a lot of these universities. So, but again, mine is not the model. You're not going to do 22 years without an education, higher education, and then land a job, what's for me a dream job right out of the gate. I mean, it really is kind of a one-off bolt of lightning type of thing. So, I mean, just don't jump without a parachute. You got to have a plan. You got to start planning ahead. And if you haven't started planning yet, it's not too late, but start today.
So, if there's anything else you would put out there as far as some of the feelings that people may feel and how to kind of overcome them as you prepare to transition or as you're transitioning, what would that be? And just we'll sign off on that.
So you kind of hit on it earlier. Your first step might not be a leap. You know what I mean? Like, your first step might be something to transition you. It might be your transition to your transition. So if you feel that you're kind of floundering a little bit, and like, this isn't really what I want to do, and you might have an identity crisis a little bit, like, man, you couldn't wait to get out. And now, God, I just wish I was in Afghanistan. Yeah. And we talked about that on the phone. Yeah. When I was in Afghanistan, all I had to worry about was my weapon, my NVGs, all my accountable equipment, and all the stuff I could carry on my back. Well, then you come here, and then real world sets in, and the bills, and how do I get a job? And what I would say is, if you find yourself in the transition to the transition, don't forget to take care of yourself. I mean, in the Marine Corps, at least, I'm sure the other services are very similar. The focus is not on the individual; it's on the team. Yep. The success of the team is the success of the whole unit as a whole. There is no individualism. Well, unfortunately, when you get out, it kind of only does come down to you. So we had talked briefly earlier, if you find yourself in transition, and maybe it's not your dream job that you landed, what saved me really, aside from my wife, is I got back into things that I knew that I was good at and proficient at. So even if I was not killing it at work, or I felt like I was failing as a civilian, which sounds ridiculous, for me it was my hobby. I got into model building, and I knew I could, it was cathartic for me. I was a marathon runner. I can't run anymore because my back is jacked. So how do I clear my head? Well, I started modeling, and as I'm doing my hobby, my head's getting clear, and things are kind of coming into focus with work. I had an outlet. Yep. And it really was taking care of the whole mind-body experience type of thing. And again, I'm the anomaly. I had the good job, but I could absolutely see where somebody would be frustrated if they're, doing a job that, man, I had so much responsibility for so much equipment and so many personnel when I was in the Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Air Force, and now I'm doing this job I never imagined myself doing. But if you're going to school or you're bettering yourself or whatever job that you're in, you're just killing it. If you're a ditch digger, be the best ditch digger they ever saw. Yeah. But make sure you take care of yourself mentally and physically and have that outlet. And for God's sake, reach out to people. Go find a VFW. Go find a veterans center. Go to the VA. Find a group. Just reach out to other veterans and make sure you stay in contact with them.
And I'll finish with one of the, I think, underlying everything you just said, there is a point where you may feel like you lack the purpose of what you did. Yeah. And what I'm doing now, it just doesn't carry as much weight.
Doesn't matter.
Excited. I'm not whatever. This just seems kind of almost maybe beneath me. But you can bring passion to whatever it is, even if it's part of the transition to the transition. And if you're able to bring that passion, then what happens? You start building connections. You start building rapport. You start building a network of people who will encourage you to seek out other things. Or someone maybe like, I want to refer you to a friend of mine who's at this company who may be able to hook you up because I know you used to do X, Y, Z. So I would really not downplay the purpose of what you're doing just because you're not doing something that involves being deployed and serving your country at the highest level. Find the purpose in what you do, and when you have those days, exactly what he said, VFW, LinkedIn, reach out to your friends, who's out that I could talk to. Look at Flyby's media, look at some of the other Flybys we've had, and then kind of get some of the insight that some of these awesome veterans have provided. So I think that's it, unless you got anything else.
Well, hey, Edison found 2,000 ways not to build a light bulb.
Perfect, man. Oh, I appreciate it very much.
You too, man.
We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Cheers.